I'm going to hand over to Kevin Jacob to start the meeting with a roll call.
Thank you, Chair. Starting from the top of the agenda, Councillor David Ray.
Here and in the meeting.
Councillor Bethia Thomas. Yeah. Just in case.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Apologies. Councillor David Hingley.
Present and in the room.
Thank you. Councillor Susan Brown.
Present and in the room.
Obviously, Councillor Liz Leffman is present. Councillor Andy Graham.
Present and in the room.
Professor Alex Fitz was around earlier. Oh, okay. Okay. We do have apologies from Professor Alistair Fitz. I believe I can see Miranda. Yes, Miranda's on the call. Although I couldn't hear you just then, Miranda.
Yeah, present online. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Nolan.
Yes, I'm present and online. Thank you.
Thank you. Angus Horner.
Present online. Thanks.
Okay. Julia Klaus. See Julia. Okay. Dan Levison. I haven't had any apologies from Dan. Okay. And Emma Hill. I can see Emma.
Present and online. Hi there.
Thank you. And just to say, Chair, that Councillor Barry Wood is on the call, as is Ian Green for the public speaking.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. So just an announcement from me, just to remind everybody that the meeting is being live streamed and recorded. And I'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Future Oxfordshire Partnership. Members of the partnership and supporting officers are present both physically and remotely. Can I remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded? Meeting chat should only be used for messages about speaking or for technical issues. No private discussions, please, but please do use the raise hand function if you want to speak and you're online, and indeed in the room for that matter. I would encourage everyone to ensure their microphones are off or they're fully muted unless they're speaking. And when you're speaking, please give your name and your organisation so that people who are listening into this will know who you are. So thank you very much indeed. I'm going to turn now to the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of October. I'm just going to ask if there are any inaccuracies in those minutes. I don't see any hands. So can I ask members to agree this is a correct record of the meeting? Agreed. Thank you very much. I'll sign those in due course. And we'll now move on to item 3, which is public participation. And Ian Green from the Oxford Civic Society, I believe that you want to address us and that you're online. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Liz. Yes, we want to address the first item, I think, on your agenda, which is the reset of the FOP. And I should make it absolutely clear at the outset that we are a great fan of the Future Oxfordshire Partnership, and we will obviously always be concerned if there's a discussion about resetting it in any way. I've got 3 points to make, really. The first is to ask you whether you would not agree that the reset is a little bit premature. The report to FOP proposes endorsement of the proposed reset and requests development of more detail and revised terms of reference after that endorsement. We suggest that this reset is premature, and actually we also suggest that it's probably flawed. The reason is that there are currently very many strategic planning, and when I say strategic, I mean it in the sense of inter-authority planning, unknowns, although we can be absolutely certain that more strategic planning of various kinds is going to be needed, and I'll go on in a moment to explain why that is. So we're suggesting why not keep the FOP as it is whilst we find out in more detail what is needed. So don't reset first, don't accept the endorsement and then do more detail. Let's find out over the next few months exactly what the Future Oxfordshire Partnership will be facing, and then let's discuss the reset. And where we think it's flawed is that it seems to be proposing decision-making powers, but it also seems to be eliminating scrutiny, which absolutely can't be right. What have we got in mind when we say that strategic planning is coming to the fore in the next few months? Well, amongst other things, We've got the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which is, we might get a sight of this in the spring, possibly quite early in the spring. And it is definitely going to introduce strategic planning, that is to say, into authority planning, and a strengthened duty to cooperate. This will be a boon to us in Oxfordshire. This kind of planning is absolutely essential if we are to plan Oxfordshire's strategic infrastructure in the longer term, i.e. beyond the local plan time horizons. The Future Oxfordshire Partnership, as currently set up, is ideal, especially if we can assume that lessons will be learned from the very unfortunate failure of the Oxfordshire 2050 plan. But the other big thing that's coming around the corner, and around the corner very soon, possibly in a matter of days, certainly before Christmas, is the devolution white paper, which may ask us to consider county-wide unitary authority arrangements, and there may be alternative unitary arrangements that can be considered. And we'll certainly be needing to consider the future of the district and city councils. The Future Oxfordshire Partnership, as it's currently set up, is ideally placed to play a role, if not lead, the devolution discussions. And the final point I'd make is that, especially bearing in mind the anticipated challenges of the bill which is coming forward and the white paper, should the Future Oxfordshire Partnership, in whatever form, be better oriented to public debate. The current arrangements for public discussion for strategic issues being considered by the FOP are not adequate. FOP's county-wide view and its recommendations for decisions by district, city and county council merits public discussion. And I suggest that the expression of interest in devolution sent to the national government should, for example, be a public document. Indeed, devolution is very much a subject for very, very wide discussion, probably at the end of the day, referenda. So with these arguments, we suggest very strongly to the partnership today that the reset as proposed is not agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your contribution. I understand we have a couple of other contributions, written contributions from people who can't be here today, Kevin.
That's correct, Chair, and with your permission, I'll read them out as they've requested.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so the second representation we have today is from Councillor Catherine Foxhall, who is co-chair of the Joint Scrutiny Committee of South and Vale District Councils. And she's addressing in that capacity and also as an individual district council member. She says, "Dear FOP members, I address you first in my capacity as co-chair of South and Vale Joint Scrutiny, which met to discuss the FOP reset report on Monday the 18th of November. Secondly, I add my personal thoughts. As co-chair, at our scrutiny meeting, we made formal recommendations to our council's leaders, which I expand on slightly here for this group's benefit. I believe these to be a fair representation of our committee's discussions. We'd advise leaders to limit the terms of reference to where the FOP adds value and avoids duplication. Devolution, local area energy plans, PASCO, and the use of target and finish groups for other areas were suggested as areas where the FOP can add value. Point 2, the Oxfordshire Strategic Vision must be front and centre as a democratic basis for any future iteration of the FOP. Thematic priorities must derive from the delivery of the aims of this vision. Point 3, there must be more clarity on accountability, transparency and scrutiny. I note that FOP scrutiny members are also worried about the lack of reference to scrutiny in this reset paper, particularly if FOP is to have some powers delegated to it. Any powers must have equally weighted scrutiny. Point 4, leaders of councils should be in charge of the FOP work programme and ensure real results, delivery of priorities and added value. Point 5, South and Vale Joint Scrutiny are very concerned about majority voting remaining in the terms of reference rather than consensus. Point 6, if less work is being carried out by the FOP, there should be less cost to member councils of the FOP. And in her capacity as a district councillor, she says, having had a chance to reflect further on these proposals, I would like the leaders to justify very clearly what they believe the FOP is for. It cannot simply be a basket to hold a shopping list of possibilities until we know what form devolution will take. Any decisions that this group make must be democratic, transparent and accountable. Otherwise, I am concerned that this reset will have all the appearance of a substantial amount of resource being funneled into the service of 6 leaders talking shop without any real attempt to interrogate how and if the resourcing is necessary or better used elsewhere. I appreciate that the detail of resourcing has implications that should not be a matter for our speculation, but I would ask whether a proportion of each council's allocated resource to FOP could be better redirected to strengthen scrutiny capacity specific to this body within each of the councils. That's the end of the address from Councillor Foxall. Third address from Councillor Sarah James, Vale of Whitehorse District Council. I am unable to attend the meeting. Please can this be read out? I have listened to the deliberations of South and Wales Joint Scrutiny Committee and of the FOP Scrutiny Panel as they have reviewed the contents of the FOP reset paper that is before you today. My overall impression is of confusion and contradiction about the nature and powers of the current FOP, never mind the proposed reset. Speaking to the FOP Scrutiny Panel, Councillor Leffman said of the current arrangements that FOP does not take decisions and there is no intention to change that. Councillor Thomas said to South and Wales Joint Scrutiny Committee that FOP has always been a decision-making body, but one that it has been careful not to make too many decisions. These statements may not be entirely contradictory, but they certainly do not provide clarity and transparency. A key concern for me is that FOP's purpose, its areas of influence and responsibility, and its powers are very poorly defined. The FOP Scrutiny Panel seems to have struggled to establish a clear and effective role. The advisory groups have been utterly inscrutable. This matters because FOP costs the council's money, directly or indirectly, and partnership working is key to many of our priorities. We need to be able to see what works well, what is value for money, what is a support to council's work for residents, and what is duplication, distraction, or even a hindrance. So a reset is not unwelcome. The discussions at the Scrutiny Panel and Committee that I saw did not fill me with confidence that this is a move towards a more transparent and accountable way of partnership working. I request that in the leaders' discussion of this item today, there is room for an open and frank discussion that will lay bare the expectations and aims of all partners so that the rest of us can understand what is going on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for reading those out, Kevin. And we'll move on now to the item to which they relate, which is item number 4, which is the. We'll move on to the item number 4, which is the Partnership Scrutiny Panel update. And I think I'm right in saying that Councillor Barry Wood is online to take us through that. Are you there, Barry?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Over to you then.
Okay, well, a couple of things to say, I guess. The first one is I don't propose to read out the written report that you will have received from the scrutiny panel, which I hope is self-explanatory. If it's not self-explanatory in any point, then members can ask me and I'll try and clarify. The second point really is to say a thanks to you, Chair, for attending the last meeting of the scrutiny panel, because it turned out to be, shall I say, a dedicated meeting to your item 4, and it was as well that you were there, because you were able to, as it were, push back where there was things that were misunderstood. So I think that was extremely valuable use of your time, and I'm very grateful for that. for other members of the FOP, if you have not seen the recording of the scrutiny panel meeting, I understand that you are busy people. Believe me, I understand this. Then I do say, if you do have a spare hour, it is worthy of some merit. What I would add, Chair, is that there are a couple of things that were, as it were, mentioned en passant at the panel meeting, which are worthy of adding to what you members here have already been presented with, and they are observations to the effect that, and I guess some of these things are obvious, but you know, who knows, maybe not exactly. But the first one is how it will be important going forward that the new emerging leaders board, or whatever you end up calling it, attaches or continues to reflect the strategic vision, the Oxfordshire strategic vision. Because if you didn't, that well, it would be incongruous if you didn't. But members of the panel sought to make the point that the future arrangements may need to delve into what constitutes further appropriate inward investment into our county, rather than just any, if that makes sense to you. And so that there was an emphasis made on that, about how you seek to replace fading industries with emergent ones, I guess. There was also some, and your other speakers have referred to this, Chair, there was some preoccupation in our meeting with a requirement, if possible, please, when you get one, for a clarity of the governance arrangements that will flow from the government white paper. I completely understand. How the hell can you do that before you see it? Well, you can't. But when there is one, and there starts to be some clarity around governance, because there is concern that no one knows what it is, how a county might move to one or more unitaries, or a combined authority with or without a directly elected mayor, blah, 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 blah. All of that stuff, people sort of kind of know what the words mean, but not what the strict governance arrangements are around those things. And I think that would be, you know, a great boon to all concerned, really. And it's a matter of where political power will actually lie. That's the key question. And whether it'll be with a members board, whether it will be with individual councils, whether it will be with the upper tier authority, and inside those councils, will it lie with the cabinet structure, or will it have to be referred to full council? All kind of question mark, don't know, give me one on sport kind of questions. So, Chair, that is the conclusion, really. We do assume, I do assume, I hope all down there in the room assume, that if you have a statutory joint committee going forward, then ergo it follows you will need a joint scrutiny committee, and that is alluded to in your report. It says that in your report. So that's all from me, Chair. I'm sorry to have waffled on a bit longer than usual.
That's absolutely fine, thank you, Councillor Wood. And I have to say it was a very lively scrutiny meeting, so thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm glad I could answer some of the questions that people raised. And we note the questions that have been submitted by the partnership, and we'll bear those in mind in our discussion on the next item. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. So that takes us on to item number 5, which is the paper in question, which is the Future Oxfordshire Partnership Reset. So I'm going to ask Andrew and Robin to introduce this paper to us, and then we'll open a discussion around the contents. And we, so we'll start with, and indeed bearing in mind what the FOP Scrutiny Committee and our speakers have already said. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Perhaps just a little bit of preamble. I think the purpose of this paper has really been to capture the essence of the conversations to date, rather than trying to set out definitive proposals for the way forward. The purpose of this afternoon is for you to have a discussion about which elements of this you want to take forward, for officers to work it up to the next level of detail. And I think we've touched on some of the factors already that lie behind the need for a reset at this point. One is the imminence of some news about devolution. We don't know the details as yet, but we need to be prepared to engage in that conversation appropriately. Another is the winding down of the Oxfordshire Housing and Growth Deal, which means that the structures and committees that we put in place to deal with the Housing and Growth Deal no longer really have their place, and we need to move on from those arrangements. So I think those are key drivers. Probably not a great deal more to say because I think the paper captures it, but Robin may wish to add a little on the devolution conversation.
Chair, I mean, as others have pointed out, and as the chair of the scrutiny panel pointed out, we are awaiting developments, but I think the intention with this and the work we're doing more broadly is trying to set us up in the best position to be getting going with whatever arrives on us rather than then having to play catch up afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think all members of FOP will have had a chance to look at this paper. So I'll open it up to people for questions or comments. Anybody want to ask anything or speak or make any comments about the paper? David Hingley.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, thank you for the paper. I think it is a good paper. There's a lot of good information in there. Thank you also to the scrutiny panel for looking into this in some detail, and thank you to Councillor Wood for his extra comments there, which makes sense to me. I hope that in taking this forward, and I think we can take this forward in some way, we do bear in mind the need for proportionate scrutiny of this new group in some form. I think that's quite important, but obviously we need to work out precisely the powers that the group is going to have, and I'm sure that will be taken account of as we move forward with this, to make sure that this is something that does offer a strong strategic leadership to the county through us. So interested in what others have to say at the moment, but I think this is something that in general is going in the right direction.
Thank you. Andy Graham.
Yes, thank you for the paper, and following on, I kind of think it's about the trajectory of travel, if you like, and I think it is time that we actually did do this reshape. I know there's uncertainties in the background, but kind of we can't actually base everything on uncertainties. We have to give ourselves certainty as an Oxfordshire-wide approach, and I think this will actually give us more focused strategic direction in terms of partnership working. And the paper clearly sets out some of the priorities and purposes. We do need those in terms of reference to actually come forward. But having said that, there's a little bit of detail which I think officers can go away and look at in terms of, particularly in terms of health infrastructure, which has been raised previously at FOP. But I'm looking forward to the challenge that this will bring us to really work focused, and we will avoid any duplication as a result, because it's a strategic way of working. And as long as we have good scrutiny, I kind of feel that we're in a good place to take this forward as Oxfordshire leaders. And I really do support the tenor of this report, and with those adjustments and considerations to be taken forward to the next meeting, I think would be a good way forward.
Thank you. Beth, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, and thank you for the paper. I think it's a really good starting point, and as Councillor Graham says, a good point that we can launch a new vision for Oxfordshire, a democratic vision for Oxfordshire, where we can discuss subjects that we set the agenda for. I think it has been, well, I can't speak for everybody, but it's definitely been through Vale's audit and scrutiny channels, and they've put in quite a lot of comments. Broadly supportive, I think, but very clear that they would like to see much more clarity, more exploration of the scrutiny function, whether it go through individual councils or there's a separate function. We like the streamlined nature of it, and from my members, I believe they were indicating that they would want even more focused agenda and spectrum of subjects that we cover. I think, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there. It definitely is the time that we need to make this change. We've been talking about it for long enough already, and it has been confused by devolution, but I think we can get through. Thank you.
Thank you. David Ruin.
Thank you. I have to start by disagreeing with the speaker from the Oxford Civic Society. I think that FOP had expanded to fit the space provided. The growth deal has, it had a very firm purpose, which was in managing the growth deal. That has gone beyond the point at which this body is managing it. And so it's important that we refocus this group into what it is we actually want to do together, and where we can add value by doing things together. I do recognise that we're in an interregnum between the growth deal ending and whatever awaits us in the local government white paper when that comes. But we can't wait for that to land, because even if it's clear in what it says, which government white papers are not always clear in what they say, but even if it is, it could take a couple of years to be implemented, and we need something to fill that gap. And I think this paper, and there are bits that I think every one of us would disagree with. There are odd bits, I mean, that's the nature of joint working, but I think it gives us a steer as the direction of travel, and I look forward to seeing the terms of reference, which I think are the important part, where we actually, well, there are two important parts that lead on from this. One is setting the terms of reference, and then the other is the mechanism for putting things on our agenda. I think in the past, because we had an area of work which was environment, it was possible to put lots of things on the agenda of that. And because we had an area of work that was called planning, then we could put things on that. I think we have to apply a filter before we set off on bits of work. And what is set out in this paper, and hopefully what will be in the terms of reference, is a mechanism for us deciding what it is we actually want to spend our time on, rather than the mysterious process that it goes through at the moment. Mysterious to me. I'm sure somebody understands that.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to reflect back a little bit, I think, on the points made by the various submissions, both from the speakers and the speakers who couldn't be here, and also scrutiny. It seems to me that if you're being attacked from both sides, if I could put it that way, you're probably getting something about right. And I think that is kind of where we are. So I think from Ian, we were hearing about what he saw as the strengths of partnership working, and I think from the two other speakers whose contributions Kevin read out for us, they were sort of concerned about some of the partnership working. It seems to me that this is steering a middle ground, trying to make sure that we are getting the balance right between continuing what has been valuable about our partnership working and making sure that we are fit for the future in terms of being ready for whatever comes our way through the devolution bill. And I mean, various people have said it, and it's absolutely true. We don't know yet for certain what is coming, and we will have to fit around it. We may have some ideas about it, but they are at the moment just that. So I think it's a good report. I think it reflects the discussions we've had so far. I think it allows us to move forward to the next stage and hopefully come back in January with terms of reference that we can then agree. And I hope that we can do that and move on, try and make sure that it is a sort of more streamlined body. I think we've heard the desire to make sure that a decision-making body has a scrutiny function attached to it, and I think that's right. Although I think we will want to be quite tight in terms of what that body is doing and making sure it is tied absolutely to the agenda that we have, rather than going off and doing its own work. And then, other than that, the only other thing I wanted to say was, whilst I think it's really important that we try wherever possible to reach consensus, I think it's really important that no one organisation is able to veto decisions that the majority want to make.
Thank you. Yes, I think actually the thing that what I took from the comments that we've received, particularly from the scrutiny committee and from the two councillors who put forward their concerns around the document, is that there has been some confusion around the decision-making process. So I think we need to be clear about whether we think this is going to be a statutory body and has decision-making powers or not. That needs to be included in the terms of reference. I think we need to be very clear about that, because there, as they have said, there's the lack of clarity around that. And the other thing that I think is really important is that it's about adding value to what we do individually in our different councils. So it's bringing things together and looking at things at a strategic level, and agreeing the things that we need to do collectively that will work with, that will dovetail with what we're doing in our individual councils, but add to that. So I mean, some of the things that were brought up, such as the local area energy plans, PASCO, I think are really important. We need to bear that in mind. And I think also we need to recognise that actually quite a lot of the funding that goes into FOP goes into organisations like the Local Nature Partnership and the OIEP. And we need to look at how we're going to do that, you know, how we're going to support those organisations going forward, because they're doing exactly the sort of work that we want to do, I think, jointly with one another. And I think reference was made to the meeting yesterday that we had with the launch of the Marmot Place, and you know, how do we do that sort of thing collectively, I think is really, really important to recognise. So thank you very much. Is there anything else anybody wants to say on this? I think I'm just getting a general sense that people are comfortable with the direction of travel. There's a bit more detail that we need to go into. Does anybody else want to add anything at this point? In which case, I'd like to do two things. One is I'd really like to thank those members of the FOP who are with us today who are not leaders of the council. The other members, such as Miranda, Alistair Fitt, who's not actually with us, Alex Betts, Angus and Paul, for your contributions, and Emma also, who's online from the Environment Agency. You've been invaluable partners on this journey. And it's really important to recognise the contribution that you've made. So thank you all very, very much indeed for that. The second question that I have for members of the FOP is, are you content with moving forward as per the proposal in this paper? And if so, are we recognising that the future Oxfordshire partnership is now going to effectively close, and that we'll be moving on to a joint committee which will be to having its first meeting, I guess, in January. Is that what people would like to do at this stage? Can I see a show of hands for those who think that that's the right way to go forward? Yep. Okay, that's great. Thank you. So it has been agreed that we will effectively draw a line underneath the FOP as it currently exists, that we will meet in January as a joint leaders committee, or whatever we choose to call it. That has yet to be agreed. And that at that meeting, we will ask officers to come forward with terms of reference for the new joint committee, which will include reference to some of the things that have been pointed out to us today by the Scrutiny Committee and others, in terms of how we will manage things like the scrutiny function, and other aspects of what we've been doing in the past, including things like some of the advisory committees. We might want to retain them, but we haven't made that decision yet. Bethia, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Sorry, does that mean in January we will have the terms of reference available?
Yeah.
Do you think that's a realistic timescale? Yeah.
I'm going to ask officers whether.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. I'm not asking you.
So, Chair, if I can comment perhaps, I think the January meeting, it won't be possible to have formally constituted a new thing by then, because if we're going to change the terms of reference, they will need to go back to each individual council for approval through whatever democratic process is needed. I think what officers can commit to do is to bring proposed terms of reference to that meeting in January, for leaders then to either agree or not, and then to take them forward to recommend for formal adoption.
And I think we need also to agree that that meeting will take place, as this meeting has always done, in public, so that people can be part of that process. So we'll use the same timetable that we've got for meetings for the FOP. But it won't be the FOP anymore. I think that's what I'm hearing from people. Are we all agreed with that? Thank you. So we'll meet next January as leaders, and we will agree the terms of reference going forward and agree what we're going to call the committee. And thank you all very much indeed. And again, my thanks to all the other members of the FOP for everything you've done over the last few years and the extraordinary contribution that you've made. And I have to say, I think, you know, the successful completion of the growth deal, I know we've had our ups and downs on that because there's been issues around funding that we've had to deal with thanks to the pandemic and thanks to inflation, but we've got there, and you know, the projects that we've been responsible for scrutinising will go forward, and it's all thanks to all of those people involved. And I didn't mention you, Nigel, who's here in the room from the LEP. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution. And there will obviously be future conversations around things like devolution, because that will come forward, but we don't know yet what that's going to look like. So thank you very much indeed, and we'll move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 6, the housing and growth deal, which we're just updating, I think, on where we are with that, having just mentioned that that's been a large part of our work over the last few years. And I think, Valerie, you're going to be talking to us about where we are with that. And I believe Lorna is also online to talk about finances.
Thank you, Councillor. I think the board always starts with the financial update, so I wouldn't mind if Lorna were to start on the update, and then I'll update on any progress on schemes.
Lorna, are you there to update?
Hello. I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So this is just the quarterly report to the FOP in relation to the housing and growth deal. Obviously, as the discussions you've just had, this is coming towards the end of the programme now, with little over a quarter of the year remaining before all of the funding needs to be committed and spent. The annexes set out the programmes that the funding is allocated to. There's only been 2 minor changes since the last quarter, and currently the expectation is that those programmes will be delivered by the end of the financial year. I think there's nothing else to add unless there's any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from any of the members of the FOP? Nope. Okay, thank you very much, Lorna. And we'll hand over to Valerie.
Thank you, Councillor Lefman. So yeah, I think as Lorna alluded to, we like drawing towards the end of the the growth deal schemes. We've completed some further schemes at the end of Q2 of this year, which is the Kidlington Roundabout and Wantage Eastern Link Road. I believe Wantage Eastern Link Road, we've got an opening ceremony planned in a week's time. Benson Relief Road is another one that is on the cusp of being completed. We're drawing to final accounts on that scheme. Currently in construction and still on target for completion by February 25 is Banbury Road Roundabout, the Woodstock Road Corridor, and Padbury Roundabout. We've also just started on Tramway Road in Banbury, and we've entered into contracts for Lodge Hill and Steventon Lights, which will start construction imminently. And then we've got access to Whitney, of course, which is still programmed to start as well soonest, but with all spend, growth deal spend complete in March 25. Doesn't mean that some of our programs won't carry on construction beyond that date, but that aspect of the funding will be spent by then. And that's my update as well.
Thank you. Any questions from anybody? No. Well, thank you very much indeed, Valerie.
Thank you.
For that update. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item then, and that's the Enabling Community-Led Housing paper. Paul, I believe you're online and you're going to be taking us through this.
I am. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. So, just a few words of context, if I may, and apologies for the hideous echo. So, I would imagine the partnership will recognise that community-led housing is something that we have either individually or collectively been promoting for a number of years. There is specific reference in a number of local plans to the promotion of community-led housing, the Southern Vale Joint Local Plan being the most recent of those. And there is an existing collective project funded by the 6 councils to enable an organisation called Community First Oxfordshire to provide enabling support to local residents who want to form themselves into community-led housing groups. And so this particular business case builds upon the latter of those collective projects that we already have in place, and basically puts another layer on that enabling cake, enabling a little bit more resource for them to be more proactive, reaching out to groups at the very earliest stages of their configuration, Chair, where they may be little more than just a group of people in a parish hall wondering how they could deal with a local issue that they've identified. I mentioned the fact that it's an existing project because there's a number of reasons why that's important. I mean, from a resource perspective, that means that we're able to rely upon existing project management and project governance structures that the councils have already set up. So there's no additional resource requirements from the councils to take this project forward. It already means that we have an established set of funding arrangements that we can duplicate with Community First Oxfordshire. And that leads us to be quite confident that this project can get up and off the ground quite quickly and hopefully will be successful. If I might just conclude by addressing the points that scrutiny made, which are in the minutes of the scrutiny panel concerning this report. I was grateful for their support for it. They asked specifically why community land trusts weren't referenced in the report. Obviously, there have been a number of successful community land trust projects in Oxfordshire. And the reason for that, Chair, is that community-led housing is a generic term for, well, unsurprisingly, housing led by the community. And that may take a number of forms. It could be a community land trust, it could be a housing cooperative, it could be a partnership with a housing association, dependent upon how the group wish to take that particular project in direction. So it's not mentioned because this project is really dealing with the formation of community-led housing groups at their very earliest stages. They'll come on to questions about exactly what their constitution and configuration looks like, ably helped by Community First Oxfordshire and the advice that they'll be providing. I hope that's clear, Chair, and for me that's pretty brief. So I'm happy to take any questions.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed for that, Paul. Any questions from Councillor Graham, Andy?
Yeah, I'm just going back to what the group were talking about in terms of community land trusts, because I think it is a good example of some of the concerns going forward. And I kind of understand as well at the same time that Community First could well be addressing this, but I kind of think they've already highlighted something that really needs to be taken on. So I kind of, without being prescriptive to it, I kind of think it's the recognition of that and the issues, for example, of managing estates, you know, private estates, and how that is managed as opposed to any other way of doing it, because it has actually become an issue in some of our districts whereby, you know, roads aren't completed, and it's because it's in private hands, we end up with a situation whereby they feel as if they're in deficit. And whilst the residents may have made choices, they may have not realised those choices at the time of purchase because it's a relatively new thing. But I kind of think, so in some ways, I just wanted to raise the issue because they've raised it clearly as well. And I just hope that Community First, in terms of the work they're taking forward, will actually take account of those concerns and actually look at it within part of the brief. And my second question really is on the 38,000 that is referenced in the report. Can you just clarify, because it does say where it comes from and there's no extra bidding, but could you just exemplify the 2,000 per annum that's needed until March 2026? Because I don't think I've got confused with the actual funding. So the 38,000, I think we know where that's come from. You've referenced it in the report, but I'm not quite sure what the 2,000 is, and is there any additional funding that's required by councils?
Are you happy for me to answer those now, Chair, or take further
yes,
questions?
Absolutely.
So the issue of the success of Community Land Trust in Oxfordshire, I think, is well made by Councillor Graham. I mean, a notable example that a number of you will know is Croft Court in Botley, which is one such example. I don't think we're in the position where we should be really prescribing what route community-led housing should take. I think a key part of this is enabling the groups to decide how they might like to take this. And if, for example, that group was looking at the refurbishment of an old large building, and some of that has happened in Oxford City, obviously a community land trust wouldn't work there, whereas a housing cooperative would be a much more appropriate model. The issue that you speak of about the management of community space is obviously dealt with by Community Land Trust, because the Land Trust holds the land in joint ownership. Whereas if the land is held, for example, by one landowner or developer, then councils have over time found themselves in the position where a discussion over who is managing that green space needs to be taken up. And such discussions are currently taking place in Charwell, for example. And Community First Oxfordshire are carrying out a piece of work for that council to consider how what's called a community management organisation in the sites in North West Bicester might best be taken forward. So the issue of management of the CMOs is probably most appropriately dealt with through the individual councils' discussions with their developers, or perhaps enshrined in Section 106. But Councillor Graham is quite right that a community land trust is a very convenient way of making sure that the ownership of that land is quite clearly defined, and so that if there are any green spaces there, we know how it will get dealt with. The second point that you make about the funding, the 38,000 is drawn from the capacity fund of the Housing and Growth Deal. Members with longer memories will remember that community-led housing was one of the stated intentions, or the promotion of community-led housing was one of the stated intentions of the Housing and Growth Deal. So it's entirely appropriate that we draw on that money to fund this project. What I made mention of at the start of my sort of missive on this, I talked about the existing project that the 6 councils run, and that's funded by a £2,000 grant from each of the 6 councils, which was funded for the years 23, 24 and 24, 25. So it runs out in March of next year. It is clearly not yet appropriate for us to say whether councils will continue that funding, but I sought some, if you will, soft commitment from the councils as to whether they would be prepared to consider it. And it's that I make mention of in the report. I hope that's clear.
Thank you. I hope that is clear, Councillor Graham. Yes. Any other questions on this paper from anybody? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Paul. So we're asked to approve the community-led housing business case, which is attached to Appendix 1. And we're also asked to agree to fund the implementation of this business case to the value of £38,000 from the Housing and Growth Deal Capacity Fund. Are members agreed?
Aye.
Yeah. Anybody disagree? Okay, great. Thank you very much indeed. So that will go forward. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 8, which is the Oxfordshire Net Zero Route Map and Action Plan. And Sarah, are you going to come to the table and take us through that? Thank you very much. So it's you and not Ariane, is it? Or is Ariane coming as well? Right, and you've got some slides for us. Great, thank you very much.
Just check my mic's on. So thanks. Yeah, I've just got a few slides to run through what is quite a detailed report, and it's reporting back to members on progress against the 5 priority actions they agreed for joint working, reporting to the Environmental Advisory Group, and also a brief update on the carbon figures that have now been published by DESNZ for Oxfordshire. Can you move us on, Kevin? Thanks. So just a background about where some of these priority actions were drawn from. Members will remember the work to produce with the university to produce PASCO, which is probably the most sort of in-depth scenario on how a place gets to net zero certainly that I've seen. And off the back of that, we converted that into a route map and action plan, and particularly a series of carbon budgets for the county. Sustainability Office has been working together to take forward 5 of the work streams under this report. Kevin, I'll let you move on if that's okay. Thanks. Super. Thank you. And it's worth saying that the 5 work streams we've been prioritising together are clearly not the sort of beginning and end of all the work we're doing on climate action in the county. Districts, of course, are leading significantly through their local plans, the county through the LTCP work to decarbonise our own estate. But this work was really to think about where we focus resource on collective challenges that need to happen at a county scale and to unlock infrastructure. So I'll just run through a few highlights and challenges of the 5 work packages, and then I'll close on the county-wide emissions. So one of the areas that was prioritised was looking at buildings decarbonisation, and particularly that was felt that given the supply chain issues that sit under retrofitting homes, that was best dealt with at a county scale collectively. Broadly, that piece of work has been looking at 2 areas: how we might unlock retrofit for able to pay households. There's a number of innovation programs there and some work that's taken place through ZEGCOP, looking at some of the tools that might help homes that have the money to retrofit but perhaps aren't taking that action at the moment. The other area of work that's clearly key to us for delivering our health outcomes as well is delivering retrofit to homes in fuel poverty. We're just coming to the end of the Home Upgrade Grant Scheme, which is the government's latest funding around that. We will have completed about 250 homes this year by the time that comes to a close. That funding has been very difficult for officers to deliver. In year 1, we had to give up some funding under that funding stream. But actually overall, although there are small numbers of homes delivered, Oxfordshire's delivered about 5% of all installs under that programme nationally. So it just really speaks to the challenge of getting some of that retrofit funding deployed, and the need for long-term funding of retrofit schemes to really invigorate the supply chain. Government has now released Warm Homes Local Grant, and all the Oxfordshire authorities are putting in a joint bid to Warm Homes Local Grant for about 10 million over 3 years. Thanks. The second key strand of our work was the work on local area energy planning. We're probably one of very few, if not the only 2-tier area to start to take forward a local area energy plan. And this was the recognition that where Oxfordshire's ahead of other areas in deployment of things like heat pumps and EV charging, and also with high economic growth, we're starting to come up against real grid constraints. That piece of work has now been tendered. We will be moving forward in the next 12 months on creating a local area energy plan led by each district, but coming together to form a county picture of our energy needs and infrastructure needs. The timing of that for us is really good because people are probably aware the new regional energy systems planner, or may be aware, is being put into place, and this will give us some really concrete evidence to talk to that new statutory role about our needs in Oxfordshire. Very briefly on EV charging, because I think most people are fairly familiar with this programme of work. Oxford Levi is now set to progress to deliver 1,200 public EV chargers. We've got a model to deliver the community micro hubs. As I said, the statistics show that we are still leading the way on sort of take up of EV cars in Oxfordshire, although interestingly it is one area where on the metrics for our 2025 targets under PASCO that we may well not quite meet that target in 2025. Finally, a piece of work that FOP funded jointly between the EAG and the LNP, which was to look at models for developing a carbon market within Oxfordshire, particularly looking at how we can deliver some of our LNRS and sequestration outcomes. And one of the areas that's come out of that is the need for a investment facility that will help landowners to do some of the initial investment they need to bring to market carbon sequestration, biodiversity net gain projects. Oh, it wasn't the last one. The last one, that was for the fifth one, was having a look at green finance. So some work has taken place under this work stream. Many people in the room will have attended the 100 Together conference, which is the first green finance conference in Oxfordshire in January. There is a plan for a second one in June. And off the back of that piece of work, the LEP are leading the development of the first green prospectus for Oxfordshire. This is the last one. The report's got quite a lot of depth on carbon budgets. I'm only just going to talk to one slide in there. The reason I think for talking to that is just to give people an awareness of where we are against our carbon budgets for PASCO. I appreciate it, it's quite difficult to see on the screen, but the blue line shows the carbon budgets that we set under PASCO. That is an accelerated decarbonisation. The green line shows the Committee on Climate Change's budgets for Oxfordshire. So you can see that the brown line shows current progress, that at the moment we're just outside our PASCO targets. So it really does show what a challenge it is to deliver that accelerated decarbonisation. If we continue on the current trajectory, we will probably dip below that target in 2025 and get back on track. But I think some of the data in here is really speaking to how we need to continue to augment the work with national government on things like how we deliver local power plan, clean energy mission, and also how we continue to work with our businesses through things like an expanded ZECOP. And that's my close. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much indeed for that, Sarah. Susan.
Oh gosh, I think my microphone's still on. Apologies for that. So I just wanted to pick up on the issues around electric vehicle charging, because this is becoming an increasingly sore point in Oxford, where there are many people who would like to have access to electric vehicle charging and are currently unable to get them installed in their street. Obviously, many people in Oxford don't have access to off-street charging. And I note the report says that part of the problem has been the inability to award contracts because of procurement rules, procurement challenges having made that an impossibility, which is frankly annoying to say the least. I wondered if we had been making representations to government about this, because I think if we haven't, we should do, because I think it's important they understand some of the restrictions that we're working with and some of the reasons why things are taking far, far longer than are necessary, but also what, if anything, we can do to kind of expedite this. We've got, you know, not least in ODS, a perfectly good local supplier. It feels to me that we ought to be able to procure local suppliers and give them preference where we can. And I just can't understand really why it is that we are continuing to have to wait for lengthy procurement processes to happen. And I hope that we can get things moving a little quicker, because as I said, it's becoming a real problem in the city.
Thank you. Andy.
Yeah. One, I think it's a really good report because it just shows the breadth of what one's trying to achieve. And my question is, well, there's a detailed question over retrofitting, in particular reference to paragraphs 21, 22, where you talk about the actual homes, properties that were completed and the cost of them, 15,000 per capita, and how that makes a different figure to the one above. So if you could just help me to understand the difference of what is actually in the report there, because it's not that clear to me, and where these properties were done, because that's around the county to get that sense of real impact is important. Whether it's just it was targeted in one area, you just need to understand, because one of the things that comes out of this, and I kind of raise it because all of this is only going to work inevitably at the end if it's done at scale. And I know government's got to play its part in this, because it does, because actually, you know, the funding to do this is significant. But also, I think there is a trick we're missing out here at the moment, because the DCN, which is District Councils Network, has got a work plan for retrofitting across 170 districts in the country. And I think we should align ourselves with the district council network so that we can actually see how we can do a much bigger rollout. And that's something we currently, and I'm on the DCN, that's why I'm talking about it, and I'm the spokesperson, so I can talk with a bit of authority that this is an area of work plan priority that the DCN is actually shortlisted now. So can we actually take that forward to kind of actually make sure that the work we're doing here can actually, we can look at it at scale by looking at what the district council networks are proposing moving forward. So there's 2 points on that, and the rest of it I think you actually covered, and it was very helpful. Thank you very much.
Just come back in on those points. So I think just on the technicality on the numbers in, I think it's paragraph 20 and paragraph 22 you're referring to. The 1.2 million it is cross-referred to in paragraph 2, and it's the addition of the 50 homes and the 42 homes in the next quarter. And I think the report refers to 15,000 average cost for the first 50 homes. The second tranche of homes were delivered at a slightly lower cost, but we do think those figures correspond with one another. Okay. I think what's on your point on scale, what's been very interesting, your point on geography around this, we can provide a map to people with where this funding's been deployed. This particular funding is aimed at off-gas properties. So, for example, West Oxford is a sort of prime audience for this kind of funding. The consortium for this funding did not include the City Council. The City Council joined a wider national consortium for the delivery of that funding, but I can certainly follow up with more information about where the funding has gone. In terms of scale, I think there is a really interesting conundrum about how we best split roles, because clearly scale is very important for supply chain, and the more we can kind of aggregate that and give certainty to supply chain, that's better. I think what we've also found with the national programmes under this is they haven't fared as well as the locally led programmes, because obviously that connection with community and ability to deploy the funding in the areas that really we know about and we have connections into through our services is really important in getting successful delivery. So we just probably have to get the best of both worlds in how we work with our partnerships. But I haven't come across that the initiatives of that network, so I'll follow up with your officers and into that. Thank you.
David.
Just
No, my question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yes. The question about the contracting for for EVs. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I need to take that question offline and come back to you. There certainly has been engagement with government on the barriers around grid constraints, but I don't know about the barriers on how we let local contracts around this.
So I know that as a city council, we have made representations on this, but I guess what I'm asking for is that as FOP we do the same, or whatever we're going to call ourselves going forward, or that the county also adds in their voice on this, because it is a massive slowing of the process, and it's not just affecting us; it's affecting, as your report actually quite rightly says, it's affecting councils up and down the country. So I think it's an important lobbying point, and it's something that potentially government could help us with.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, do you think it would help if we were to send a letter to the relevant minister asking for their support on this? So perhaps that's something we could look at outside this meeting, Sarah, and see if we can draft something that we can all sign up to. David.
While we're lobbying ministers, I just want to make the point that every day we're creating more houses that need retrofitting, because while ever the National Policy Plan, NPPF, doesn't allow us to insist on adequate environmental standards on new houses, we're building new houses which will need retrofitting from day one. So the numbers that we are retrofitting pale by insignificance alongside the number of houses we're building that are going to need it.
Thank you. There's also issues around transport as well, because looking at one of the charts, I think it's on page 66, where the city has reduced emissions from transport by double the amount that the Vale and West Oxfordshire have managed. And I think this is entirely down to the fact that, you've got bus services which work. And so there's some transport related issues in the rural areas that I think we need to address, which we can't address on our own. Anything else from anybody? Beth, here.
I think a lot of the things I was going to say have already been covered. I'm interested in retrofitting in terms of the capabilities we're building to address that through training schemes and apprenticeships. So that's interesting. And I'd agree with Susan about the off-street car parking, and it's not just a city. Obviously, there's lots of rural towns and historic towns and villages that have exactly the same problem. Doesn't have to be a city. The smallest village has got the same problem, so it is a collective issue.
It is in fact a problem I face myself on a daily basis. Yes, I'd love to be able to have an EV, but there's nowhere to park it or charge it. Anything else anybody wants to raise on this? Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. I think there's quite a few pointers from that we'd like some clarity on from, well, I think we're talking about writing to ministers and making the point that actually if we're going to continue to do the very good work that we've been doing in Oxfordshire, we're going to need some help in doing it. So thank you very much for that update. And we're just asked to note the report and note the county-wide greenhouse gas emissions update. So thanks everybody for that. We'll move on to item 9, which is the Future Oxfordshire Partnership Annual Report. And Becky and Andrew, I believe you're going to talk to that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as stated in the report, this is an update report covering the period August 2023 to 2024. Just to note that many of the work streams described are ongoing, so it's a sort of snapshot rather than a comprehensive review. Very grateful to the officers at individual councils who deliver the work described and also contributed information to the report. I don't think there's anything else to note except just to say that the report doesn't contain detailed updates on the Net Zero Route Map and Action Plan, which is of course overseen and coordinated by the FOP, but that has come in a separate annual report, which you've just seen. So that was just to avoid duplication. Yeah, nothing else to add from me.
Thank you. Anybody want to add anything to that? No, looks like everybody's very happy with that report. Thank you very much indeed for that. So we're just asked to I think, just asked to note the annual report. Thank you very much. Thank you, Becky. We'll move on now to the Planning Advisory Group notes, which come from the 13th of September. And I think I'm right in saying, Andy, you're going to, you have actually given us an update on that in the previous meeting, I think, haven't you? Is there anything you want to add to that based on the written notes that we've now got in our pack?
Yes, you're right. It was a verbal report. This is a much more detailed report, which actually picks up some of the significant concerns that the advisory group had in terms of planning for primary healthcare infrastructure, which is why I raised it earlier on in the meeting. And I kind of think what's important to learn from the minutes really is how this is going to be taken forward. There is a significant issue over primary healthcare infrastructure, and in particular the effective delivery of it. And it's not just a planning consideration, although it plays its role significantly. It is how that plays in to the overall funding structure which is necessary for effective delivery. And I kind of think really that's why I felt it's an important issue for us going forward to take this on, because the current system is broke. It does not work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because there is no joined up thinking and there is no joined up strategy. And there needs to be a conversation with government as well, because with government working to help us to deliver more locally and strategically across the piece, we can make a difference. We can actually get this one sorted, but we won't unless we actually, as a collective group, decide strategically what is the actual, what is the plan, what is the partnership, and how effective is that partnership? Because there's no point having partnerships that actually don't bring outturns. And I really think that the comments that were made in that meeting, it was rather a robust one, and it was a challenge for the ICB because in a sense, we want to influence, we want to partner a vision going forward, but we have to do it on the basis of trust, on a basis of timelined interventions, which would be a really effective way of bringing it forward. So I'm raising it again because I don't think this message can actually be ignored any longer, and we owe it to the people who need healthcare infrastructure to support their well-being, because everything else we do for them is at jeopardy if we don't.
Thank you. Anybody got any questions? Susan?
It's kind of more of a comment, if I'm honest. But I mean, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Andy on managing to get someone from Bob who has, at least in theory, the kind of oversight on planning issues as regards to health across to your meeting, and able to hear what I'm sure was the frustrations of the various planning members who were there. And that is a good start. But however, I mean, I think what the minutes do set out quite clearly is the problems with the current system, as you've just been outlining, not least the lack of money, but the lack of money in particular to actually engage at the proper time, which for the umpteenth time, I feel like I'm saying this, and I have said it repeatedly to people in health as well, which is at the local plan stage. It is no good asking to be consulted on individual applications, which they do occasionally, and then they stick in some random request sort of saying, oh, can you give us some money out of this development? Well, no, because you have made no case for it, and you can't even tell us what you'd spend it on, because you have made no provision for there to be any health provision or facility which is required on the back of this particular development. And until health understands the planning process and engages with it, that isn't going to change. And I wish it would, I really wish it would, but it doesn't seem to me that they have yet grasped how the process works. And I think that is really emphasised by the point that was being made there about asking to be consulted on specific applications. Well, why would they be if they have not made any representations previously through our normal annual report, local plan process? It doesn't make any sense to me.
David.
Yeah, I just wanted to avoid us giving the impression that this is a planning problem, because I don't think it is. I know I can quote an example. It's actually in Bethio's district, but within spitting distance of mine. It's actually my GP surgery, where read social media, you'll see that the council didn't plan for adequate medical supplies, but actually we did everything right. It was in the local plan. It was in the plan for that development. We got the money from the developers. What's not happening is that the health service is not allowed to own a building, and there aren't any GPs to fill the surgery. So the square of grass sits there as a monument to the failure of the health service to deliver a surgery. But all the planning side of it all went perfectly. And there is a square of ground right in the middle of a housing development that's waiting for a GP surgery and for GPs to populate it.
I think the problem,
I could point you to 3 in Oxford.
I think the problem is partly down to the fact that the GPs are private practices, so they can decide whether they choose to come to a particular area or not, and that's one of the barriers that we face in actually making any kind of a strategic decision about where doctors' surgeries need to go. Andy.
It's true, but I think it's taking on David's point about it not just being about planning, because it is partly, but it's also about the responsibility to fund GP surgeries as well as the GPs themselves. And so what I'm saying is it's the crunch of partnership working is when you are equal in the room and you can make it happen. Whether you're coming from a planning perspective, from the delivery, from a health perspective, or it's from a government which actually needs to take the lead to enable that to happen, to set the framework up. And where funding is missing at the moment, with the ICB, there is no clear vision. And unless we get a shared vision, which we all buy into, and we all sit round the table to set up templates that can work strategically across the piece, we will not make a start on this. And rather than the spaghetti approach, which is always a mess if you actually eat it the Italian style, or the lasagna, which is a much more layered approach, and I would advocate that for primary infrastructure metaphor working, I think that's the way forward. So I hope that when we meet next and we look at priorities, this one is something we can get round.
I think those of us who are on the ICP would agree that actually we've looked at strategies, but there's no delivery underneath those strategies, and that's the problem. So I think, I know we haven't had an ICP meeting for something like, I think, over 6 months now, and there is a plan, I think, to hold one in January, but I think, David, you and I are on the ICP, and it's probably something we need to take to them, because we need to put the pressure on the ICB itself to have a discussion around what do we do about doctors' surgeries, dental practices, how do we actually create the infrastructure to make that possible, and how do we then direct people to set up practices in those areas where it's needed. I think, Susan, did you have your hand up?
Sorry, no, I was very rudely just shouting out. I was saying pharmacies as well, so, because I think that is important. It's again referenced in the minutes here, but I mean, I think what has been identified is the lack of ability to strategically plan alongside local authorities for health services, and alongside the housing and job growth that is going in this is happening in this area, it is a really significant issue. And of course, the other issue is that a lot of health services, including GP practices, are in the wrong places. So, for instance, in the city, there are an awful lot of GP surgeries in North Oxford and in the centre of Oxford, but in the estates where the health needs are actually far, far greater, there are very few GPs. Many areas are not covered at all. So, you know, this is not a good distribution, and you know, frankly, we do need a better way forward. I'm hoping that maybe one of the things that if we have devolution and a combined authority, this is one of the things that we could jointly be working on with a relevant health body, whatever the ICB or whatever succeeds it.
That's also another question, David.
Thank you. Yeah, just like to echo like what's been said by other leaders here, and thank Andy, Councillor Graham, for the work that you've done on this, bringing this issue forward and having that meeting. I think that's important. Like everybody else here, the issue of primary healthcare comes up very frequently at my district. It's a matter of deep concern to councillors and to residents, and I think it's really important that we do what we can as a strategic group of some sort to assist with this and to encourage the ICB to do its part. Particularly something that comes up a lot is the drawing down of Section 106 monies, trying to make sure that they actually do draw them down, and as I understand it, they can be used for digital services as well as things like GP surgeries, and it may be that prioritising those is in some cases a useful thing to do. To make sure that primary healthcare services do get out to residents as quickly and efficiently as possible. So I think this is a really important piece of work that we all must engage more closely with.
Thank you, David, and I'll come back to you, Andy.
Yeah, and apologies if we are drifting a little bit off subject, but at the ICP meeting that we did have, we've had two or three, I think. We actually approved a really good primary care strategy, which includes pharmacies and dentistry. But as I said at that meeting, we won't be judged by the strategy. We'll be judged by whether people can get appointments. And you can't treat people with a strategy. And yeah, you can strategize all you like, but if there's no money to deliver the service, it will just sit on the shelf.
Absolutely, Andy.
Just finally, from the minutes from that meeting, there was actions that were actually. I suggest that these actions be actually considered by the new group, leaders group, going forward, as that will actually start to put teeth on what we need to do in terms of going forward. So rather than the actions be considered here, as the officers are actually looking at the priorities in the earlier report, in the reset, may I suggest that that is taken on as a matter of course as well.
Thank you. Yes, I think the point was made that this is not really a planning issue. It's probably an issue that needs to be taken to our health partners so that they can understand the constraints that they're putting on new communities by not actually doing what they're being asked to do, which is to bring forward some of these practices. And the idea of, you know, the fact that we've got green space that should have been built on, and we should have had surgeries built long ago, but it hasn't been done even though the money's there to do it, is down to the fact that there isn't that connection between us, or the district council at any rate, and the health partners. It's certainly something that we can take to the Health and Wellbeing Board, as this has been suggested, but I do think we should add the ICP to that, because that's, you know, the board that then feeds up into the ICB some of the proposals. And I'm sure we're not alone. I'm sure there are other people in Berkshire and Buckinghamshire who are having exactly the same problems.
Yeah.
Bethia.
Just very quickly, I agree with you. There, it is very important that we feed into the health bodies and take that forward in that way. And yeah, also with you, David, about strategizing. There's only so much you can take strategizing. And the other point that was made, sort of about the capacity of GPs, if we're talking GP surgeries themselves at the moment, particularly I think with recent changes in the government's suggestions for pay going forward, that is really going to affect the capacity of GPs to spread and grow. So I think that's something that needs to be taken into consideration as well.
Okay, thank you. Susan.
I need to say that we'd be very happy to provide you with examples of the 3 doctor surgeries that we built, only one of which is occupied, and the others that we have sought to build over the years. So if you want concrete examples, we can provide the concrete.
Great, thank you very much. Well, hopefully officers can make a note of that, and it's something that we probably need to also, as I say, get into a paper that we can take to some other meeting beyond our own scope. Thank you very much indeed for that very useful discussion. We've got the next item on the agenda is the forward plan. We have a future Oxfordshire Partnership forward plan on this paper. We have agreed that we are no longer going to be the future Oxfordshire Partnership. So I think what we'll do is just note that for now. There may be some items on that we want to carry forward into the next iteration of this meeting, but we'll decide that when we've decided what our remit is. Thank you. And then updates on matters relevant to the future Oxfordshire Partnership. Is there anybody who wants to, do we have an update on the pan-regional partnership, for example, Andy?
There's the only update I can really give you at the moment, because the government is actually reviewing its funding of pan-regional partnerships. So there is a consultation due out. And the other thing before that was announced, there's also a conference that's taking place this week, which we will be represented at by both myself on behalf of FOP and Susan as well in her capacity, and we'll be reporting back from that. I don't think there's anything else I can actually really add usefully at this stage.
Okay, thank you. And just to give you a brief update on where we are with England's economic heartland. Very, very pleased indeed to report that the government has confirmed funding for EWR, East West Rail. However, I have to say we still need confirmation that they're going to allow the trains to start to run the second half of next year. That's still being waited on, even though they've completed the track between here and Bletchley and also been running successfully some trial trains on the route. So, we'll have to wait and see on that, but we're hopeful that between, this time next year, we should in theory be able to travel to Milton Keynes for the conference that we're going to on Friday by train, but we'll see. The other thing to say is that that EWR have confirmed that, and this is something we've been pushing on for a long time, which is electrification of the line. The starting point will be using existing diesel trains, but the intention is to have what they call discontinuous rail, which will come into effect as and when they can do that. But the intention is for it to be fully electrified, and the way that they'll do it is to avoid the cost of having to put up overhead wires that then have to go under bridges, etc. There will be some battery operation on that line, so they will pick up the electricity at one point and then they'll continue on the battery, and then they'll come back to another electrified part of the route. Although I know that there is also a concern that we should be able to run freight trains along that line as well using electrification, which does actually require a slightly different model. But in any case, that discussion is ongoing, and I think that's something that everybody will be very pleased about, the fact that we'll be seeing the back of diesel trains eventually on that line. And that's it really. Oh, and just to say also that there is going to be a conference held in January. This is actually by Oxfordshire County Council rather than EEH, but EEH is going to be involved in this, and that's the Oxford to Midlands Rail Conference that's going to be held in Oxford at the Blavatnik School on the 31st of January, which is intended to bring the focus onto our plans for electrifying Oxfordshire, which again will extend across the whole of EEH eventually. And the other part of what we're doing is looking at the legacy of EWR in terms of how it's going to impact on the various communities that are going to be around the rail network, and looking at first mile, last mile, so that people can travel sustainably to the stations and then use the train across the region. So that is my report on EEH. Is there anything else that anybody wants to bring to this meeting that we haven't already touched on? Okay, in that case, I think that's it as far as this agenda is concerned. I'm sorry, Bethia.
I was just going to reflect. The conversation that was brought out with Andy's contribution about healthcare. I'm not saying that this should be something that we take forward as agreed. It should be something possibly that we should take to health bodies. But I think that actually shows that we can have a really decent, spontaneous discussion. And that's the sort of thing that I'd probably like to see going forward. Where we, as leaders, I think, discuss a topic that's important to all our residents from different sort of points of view, but definitely, as well, Susan, with EV charging, that's the sort of thing. And we can say, well, maybe we ought to write to the relevant minister or feed into the health body. That is something that I would like to consider going forward, that is an actual meaningful discussion and a reason that we're here.
I think what you're saying is that you'd like to have more discussion and less just reports coming to meetings for us to nod through. And I completely agree with you on that. I think that's the whole purpose of this. It's changing the way that we do the job here. And it's thinking about things that, as you rightly say, of real importance to our residents, but which cover the whole county and where we need to take a strategic view about how we're going to move forward on some things. And it may be that they have to go back to district councils for agreement and then and delivery, or it may be the county council that has a responsibility for delivering on some of these things. But we've collectively agreed what it is that we want to do and what it is that we want to achieve. I think that's really important. And you can only really do that through discussion. And, you know, there's a difference between that and having a paper brought to you and then just nodding it through. So yes, I think that's a very healthy way forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think, and it doesn't need to have. I mean, as we've said, we can set the agenda, and we can have people coming to talk to us. But it can be a sparking discussion that we could quite easily come to a conclusion about. So that's great, and thank you very much, everybody who contributed to that.
Great, thank you. And it may well be that we do actually want to involve other groups in some of the task and finish work that we might want to be completing ourselves as a leader group, as a leader committee. Okay, anything else from anybody? Thank you all very much indeed. And once again, thank you, Nigel and others, for attending these meetings so regularly over the last few years. We will in any case be working very closely with you because, you know, the LEP is now part of the County Council. And obviously for other groups, such as I mentioned earlier, the OIEP, the Local Nature Partnership, we'll be looking to those groups to work closely with us in the future because they are very important to what we're trying to achieve across the county. And just to remind you that the date of the next meeting will be the 28th of January. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good rest of the afternoon.